Hi, I'm McKenna Adamson, and I'm working on my final exam for my EDE 4304 class. For this class, my final is to teach a presentation or lesson on a certain math or science topic. So I chose a particular standard for third grade. It is to classify flowering and non-flowering plants into major groups such as those that produce seeds or those like ferns and mosses that produce spores according to their physical characteristics. So the goal of this standard really is to teach students what these non-flowering and flowering plants are, and then to teach them what classifications they go into based off of their physical characteristics. So like their roots, if they don't have roots, if they use spores to reproduce, if they have seeds to reproduce, and pollen. So that's what we'll be going over. We'll be going over three specific kinds of plants that are flowering and non-flowering. We're going to be looking at algae plants, we're going to be looking at flowering plants, and then we're also going to be looking at non-flowering plants that produce spores, specifically a fern, actually. First off in the lesson, students are going to actually learn, they're going to come up with a lot of plants they know. They can be flowering or non-flowering. They're going to be given 3 minutes to write down all of these different types of plants that they know. After they write those plants down on a piece of paper, they're going to need to keep them. And then I will begin to talk about what classifying is. So to introduce classifying to the students, I'm going to give them about 10 minutes to brainstorm 3 different categories that they can put the plants that they've produced on the piece of paper in. Later on, whenever they look at plants 1, 2, and 3, the algae, the flowering plant, and the non-flowering plant, they're actually going to be told what kind of categories they belong in. So seed bearing, spore bearing, and algae. But for now, I just want them to think of characteristics that they know about plants. So I told them specifically they can think of like colors, they can think of, they can think of colors, they can think of sizes, locations, shapes, they can think of all of those kinds of things while they're coming up with what kinds of categories they want to use. Here, the parents can help them because I want them to have plausible and like real answers whenever they're classifying these. So that's going to be part 2 of the assignment. And then after part 2, I included something called a checkpoint. I'm going to include this because I want students to be reminded of what they've previously learned and to keep checking in on themselves as they learn. So I included the questions, how do your ways of classifying differ from scientists classifying plants? And I also asked, is it important to have organized and a predetermined way of classifying plants? Why or why not? It's really important to ask the why or why not questions because it gets the students thinking and it doesn't just make them come up with an answer. They have to explain their answer. And then I also included a website under this that will show them like a graphic organizer of how to properly organize the plants. So the website's really helpful if they didn't get it from just classifying on their own. And it also will give them ideas. And then I included something called the nature walk. I included this because I thought it was a good idea for students to get outside since they probably won't be outside very much. If possible, I want parents to take the students outside and they can go look around their house or wherever they may be and look for different kinds of plants. And I encourage taking pictures so that they could submit them and maybe use them later on. I want them to determine if the plants that they see on the nature walk are seed bearing, spore bearing, or algae. So that's one of their jobs they're going to use whenever they're on the nature walk. And then I'm gonna do the activity where they examine plants 1, 2, and 3. I haven't told them what plants 1, 2, and 3 are. They're gonna use pictures of plants 1, 2, and 3 and also an explanation that I've given of them to determine what kind of category they belong in. Seed bearing, spore bearing, and algae. So yeah. Classify flowering and non-flowering plants into major groups such as those that produce seeds or like ferns and mosses that produce spores according to their physical characteristics. This standard is focusing on basic classifying of plants, focusing on flowering and non-flowering plants. The main goal we want to get out of the standard is to have students understand ways in which plants are classified by scientists. Getting started activity. You are going to write down as many plants as you know in 3 minutes on a piece of notebook paper. Your parents shouldn't help you on this. These plants can include trees, flowers, mosses, and other plants you can think of. Keep this paper that you write down the plants on. Why are we doing this? Here we're having students pull background knowledge. This is great for students to be able to pull from their own experiences. Students will succeed by using background knowledge. Intro to classifying. Alright, now parents may assist you here. I will give you guys 10 minutes to brainstorm 3 categories that you can put the plants you produced in the previous activity classifying them. Once you've finished making your own categories, look at the chart of how a scientist classifies plants on this website. This part of the activity is for students to brainstorm what they know about plants. Plant colors, their shapes, what types of plants there are, where they can be located, and many other ways that they're classified. I want parents to help if they can, to make sure the student is coming up with scientific and plausible categories. The website at the bottom of the slide is very helpful to understand classifying in case the student didn't understand what they have learned. Checkpoint. How do your ways of classifying differ from how scientists classify plants? Is it important to have an organized and predetermined way of classifying plants? Why or why not? Why include a checkpoint? Checkpoints are important to include in these kind of at-home presentations to keep the students on track. It will pull background information they've learned so far in the lesson. Nature walk time. If possible, parents, take your student outside, around your yard, apartment complex, down the sidewalk, etc., and find some plants. Take pictures of the beautiful, crazy, or exuberant ones you find if you can. On this nature walk, I want you to examine if the flowers are of the 3 categories that scientists classify plants as: seed-bearing, spore-bearing, or algae. Why are we doing this? We are doing a nature walk as part of the activity to get students moving around and going outside if possible. The nature walk will give the students real-life experiences. Students can identify flowers they know, and they can look for plants that are unfamiliar to them. Let's examine some plants up close. Normally, I would have plants ready for everyone to use. However, we do not have the pleasure of being in the classroom right now. So, we will be using pictures of plants for this part of the lesson. We are going to be looking up close at some plants from each category. However, I won't tell you which one they are in. You must solve that on your own. Why are we doing this? I love the idea of students studying plants in real life. This will have to do for the activity. I have either magnified or showed important up-close photos of the plants for students to examine. Students will use what they've learned about plants and classification to classify these 3 plants. Hi class. So first we're going to go over plant number 1. Plant number 1, we notice in the pictures that I have provided, are much different from regular plants. In the picture to the right, it looks to be like it's in the water. Also, the up close picture, you can see that the cells are almost very circular. One thing that makes this plant special is that it does not have a stem, leaves, or roots. This plant does not produce flowers, seeds, or spores like many other plants do. However, like most plants, they do go through the process of photosynthesis to release oxygen into the air. Hi class, so now we're going to go over plant number 2. One thing we notice about plant number 2 in the pictures given are that it has roots. These roots are what helps the plant stay on the ground. We also notice in the picture to the right that it has petals, it's on a stem, and we can also see the part where the pollen is, the stigma. This type of plant uses seeds to grow. The seed is the embryo of the plant. Also, this plant is pollinated by the wind and other insects, sending it throughout. That's how it keeps reproducing. Hi class, so now we're going to go over plant number 3. So one thing we notice about plant number 3 in the pictures given are that looks very much like a leaf almost, and on the picture on the right it has these things called spores. Those are much like the seeds of the plant number 2 that we saw. These spores are non-flowering and they don't produce any kind of seeds. The spores are what helps reproduce.